Welcome to another Teacher Talks tonight. Tonight we are going to have our 79th sessions, and we are going to have a very special teacher trainer. Yes, he is a legend. He is really a famous trainer, and also he's a freelance trainer and consultant, and he is Steve Darn. And probably we found the problem and we sorted it out, and now I'm gonna invite him and we're gonna start our live session with Steve Darn. Yes, I'm waiting for him to join. Yes, there he is,
Right.
finally. Great. Yes, Mr. Dan. It's great to see you. Hello,
Yes,
and
good to see you.
and welcome. Welcome to Teacher Talks 79. It's a really, really great honor to see you here.
That's very kind of you, and thank you very much for the opportunity. It's great.
Yeah, that's our pleasure to see you here. It's really, really important moment for me after attending and after listening your webinars and after attending your seminars in the live and having this conversation with you. It's priceless. I can't imagine I'm still doing this one. And thank you very much one more time for this chance, Mr. Darn.
That's my pleasure, really.
Okay, so I know that we are all busy and also you are very busy, so it's better if we can start our live sessions. Can we, Mr. Darn?
Sure, of course.
All right then. I know about you, and also the audiences know about you, but maybe we have some listeners and audiences would like to know about you. So can you tell us about yourself, please, and a bit about your marvelous and huge experiences too?
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm a UK resident, or originally from the UK. Although I'm not sure if everybody knows this, but I've actually lived in Turkey for more than 35 years now.
Wow.
Always in Izmir, which is my favourite place, and I don't think I would want to live anywhere else in Turkey. Yeah, my history is a very long one. I've been teaching for, well, let me give you a date. I've been teaching since 1972.
Wow.
Okay, so everybody do the math, okay? And you can work out there'll be two reactions to this. One reaction is absolutely horror. How is it possible for anybody to teach for that long? And the
Wow.
other one is that now we understand why he has white hair. Okay, I've been teaching for that long, but, and this may interest some people, it wasn't always to do with language teaching. I spent the first 10 years of my career in the UK as a geography teacher, and I
Really?
worked in
Wow.
both secondary and higher education as a geographer. And it wasn't until 1983 that I decided to change direction and teach English. And we'll come to the history of that a little bit later. It's an interesting story about how that happened.
Mm-hmm.
But as I changed in 1983 to language teaching, I also left the UK and came to Turkey. And my intention was to come to Turkey for a couple of years and then maybe go back and find another job in the UK. But
Mm-hmm.
as very often happens with native speakers, I stayed and I met people and life developed. I created a life here and I enjoyed it very much. So let's say that after a year or a couple of years in Izmir, I just forgot to go home. So, I've been here ever since. And in that time in Turkey, I've worked in secondary schools. I've worked in private language schools. I've worked at a university, and more recently I've worked as a freelance trainer. So that's a very brief history. I'm sure I'll reveal more detail later.
Okay, then we will talk about lots of things with you, Mr. Dan. Thank you very much. And when you think my next question is about not your experience, it's going to be about your own education. So when you think about it, what was or were your turning point or points in your own education, Mr. Dan?
So you're talking about education and not work experience, right?
Yeah. But if you would like to talk about your work experience, that can be also fine.
Well, I think my point about this, Volkan, is that actually education never stops. So, you know, whether you're a learner or whether you're a teacher or whether you're a trainer, you're still learning. So there have been many turning points. Probably in terms of education, the turning point would be when I decided to stop being a geographer and start being a language teacher. And the history of that, and that goes back to 1983, is that I had become dissatisfied, shall we say, with teaching geography in secondary schools. I was a bit disillusioned with it. My career wasn't going as I hoped. And maybe I'll tell you this story now because it's an important one. I have a friend, a colleague, who lives in Cairo in Egypt, who is writing his PhD on the influence of chance factors in teachers' careers and lives. Now, when I was a geography teacher, there was nothing to do with chance. You know, I went to school, I went to university, I got a job, I got other teaching jobs and so on. It was all kind of reasonably planned and fairly normal. In the summer of 1983, teachers in the UK have quite long summer holidays. I was living in Cambridge at the time, and I needed something to do in the summer. And I had a neighbour. I was living in a bedsit in Cambridge, and my neighbour was a Cambridge University student. And he said to me, "Why don't you try teaching in a language summer school for the summer?"
Oh, I see.
And I said to him, "Well, maybe, but I know nothing about language teaching. I have no language teaching education. I know nothing at all." And he said, "Oh, it doesn't matter. They'll take anybody as long as you can stand up and talk. It's okay."
Nice.
So the first school that I called actually offered me a job immediately because I was a qualified teacher. Didn't matter what I taught, and because I could speak the language. So I spent that summer teaching kids in a summer school just outside Cambridge. And I'll be honest with you, Volkan, I had no idea what I was doing at all. Really, no idea at all. No idea at all. But another chance factor was that the owner of that school was a Turk who had lived in England for a very long time and had connections with the university in Cambridge. And at the end of that summer school, he came up to me and he said, "Steve, what are you going to do next year?" I said, "I don't know. I'll probably just continue teaching geography." He said, "Would you like to go to Turkey?" I said, "I don't know, maybe." He said, "I have contacts in Izmir in Turkey," and I kind of shrugged because I knew nothing about Izmir at all. No idea where it is.
It's the best one.
But Volkan, this was the interesting thing. During that summer school, one of my jobs was not only to teach, but I also drove the school minibus to Heathrow Airport in London to collect kids and take them back to the school. And very often while I was waiting at the airport, other people, other teachers doing the same job as me would talk to me, and they would say things like, why don't you come and work with us in Spain? Or why don't you come and work with us in Scandinavia somewhere? Or why don't you come and work with us in Egypt or whatever? And I thought, maybe it's not a bad idea. Maybe just what I need is a change.
Mm-hmm.
I just need to change. I'm getting bored. I'm getting stale. I'm not very good at what I'm doing. I need to change. So when the school owner came to me at the end of the summer school, I said, okay. And he provided me with a plane ticket and a contract to work at Özel Türk College in Izmir.
Wow. Nice.
So basically, that story ends and another one begins with me packing one suitcase, and getting on a plane and coming to Izmir, not knowing anything about language teaching and not knowing anything about Turkey. But maybe that's what I needed. Maybe I needed an adventure.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, maybe I just needed to do something different. And I think, unfortunately, that kind of opportunity doesn't happen to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
In my case, there were a series of chance meetings and chance events which led me to Izmir. And after that, it's been a progression of learning about language teaching, learning about training language teachers, learning about Izmir, learning about Turkey, learning about the education system, etc., etc., etc. And it's been a series of challenges. So, as I said, I've worked in a private lycée here. I've worked in a private language school as a teacher, as a director of studies, as a director. I've worked in a university here. And then in 2008, I decided that I didn't want to work for anybody else. So
you want to work
I thought,
as a free teacher.
maybe I'll just work for myself, because I had the experience, I had the knowledge, and more importantly, I had the contacts.
I see.
Because for 5 years previous to that, I had worked for the British Council as the director of the Izmir Teachers Centre, which some people who are listening may remember. It closed in around 2000, I think.
I see.
But yeah, so a series of challenges, a series of different employment opportunities, and all of those things, and people, of course, have kept me here for, as I said, 35 years or so. So yeah, it's been a very long journey, a very long road.
But it's really great. It's really wonderful, and thanks to that Turk in England, in Cambridge, that gave a chance to come to Turkey. It's really great.
Absolutely, that was a very, very strange chance, very, very weird thing.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mr. Dan, to share your turning points with us and your lovely memories. Thank you. And would you like to add anything else, or can I move to the next question?
No, move on, please.
All right. Thank you. Okay. We know that you have a huge experience in teaching, and probably you have used lots of techniques and used lots of methods about ELT. So when you think about all of them, probably you have a kind of a philosophy. So in this case, what is your philosophy of teaching?
Volkan, that's a horrible question.
Sorry about that.
Trust you to find horrible questions like that. Look, I think my philosophy of teaching, as with many people, changes over time. I learned to teach English here in Turkey by doing it, basically, and with the help of some very experienced and very good people that I worked with. That was in the 1980s and early 1990s, when one of the underlying philosophies of teaching, language teaching in particular, was humanism.
I see. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so putting the students first, being good to the students, trying to get the best from them in a very kind of gentle, friendly, nice way. You know, enjoy your learning. You know, and so a lot of the approaches to language teaching came out of that humanistic attitude to teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Which, of course, yes, because I learnt to teach in that period, and I subsequently became a trainer, and I became a CELTA trainer, Delta trainer, etc., etc., etc. And a lot of that was based on the humanistic philosophy. However, and some people might be interested in this, and maybe like to think about this too. We live in a different age now. It's the 21st century.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and people of my age, and perhaps, you know, a bit younger than that, tend to forget that the students that we teach now are very different from the students that we taught 30 or 40 years ago.
I see.
The students that we teach now live in a much more materialistic society, and they expect, and this is a product of the society. It's not a criticism. They expect results for not very much effort. So I don't want to work very hard, but I still want to pass all my exams.
Yeah, exactly.
Which, of course, is what we all wanted, but you know, it's more prevalent now, I think. As a result of that, I started to question the kind of methodologies that we use, which are based in humanism. And I started to question things like the methodology that we teach on CELTA courses and Delta courses.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm never convinced how much learning is actually going on.
I see.
Okay, you know, there's teaching and there's learning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now, very often, humanism gave birth to communicative language teaching. So very often you will see a lesson, it could be in a school or a university, which is basically the teacher's job in the lesson is advanced classroom management. So it's about setting up tasks, monitoring, closing the task, giving feedback, and going on to the next thing.
Exactly.
Okay, so this is kind of management, isn't it? Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But we don't necessarily know how much the students have learnt.
Mm-hmm.
And I was quite inspired a few years ago when Jim Scrivener, who is probably almost as old as me by now, came up with this term which he called demand high teaching.
I see.
And there was a course book which he wrote with Adrian Underhill, I think, which dealt with this. And the idea behind demand high was that we need to challenge the students more.
Mm-hmm. I see.
We need to push them. We need to make sure that they're learning. Because the humanistic approach was very kind of liberal. You know, okay, yes, do this task, do this task, do this task. And maybe you'll use some of the target language, maybe you won't.
Uh-huh.
But if we challenge the students more and get them to, I know this is a very generic term, but get them to work harder in class,
mm-hmm.
perhaps we would get better results. So it may be that my philosophy has gone round in a whole circle. Because when I was at school, learning French, for example, we had to work really hard in the classroom. Okay, this is before communicative language teaching or anything else. You know, there was no pair work, there was no group work, but we learnt. And I passed my French O-level with no problems at all. So it was very clear that the teacher was doing something right.
I see. Mm-hmm.
So maybe we need a bit more challenge, a bit more effort, maybe from the teacher's point of view in terms of producing learning. It also,
I see.
I'll give you another anecdote to,
Of course. Mm-hmm.
to reinforce that, if you like. My teachers at school, when I was 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, were quite strict.
Yeah.
I'm sure some of yours were too, quite strict. You couldn't mess around in their classes. You had to focus, you had to concentrate.
Definitely.
And looking back, they were kind of, even though I may not have liked them very much, I learned to respect them because they produced results from me.
Mm-hmm.
They were almost kind of, businesslike in their approach to teaching. Now, a few years ago, when I was working at a local university here, we had a seminar given by Tony Wright, who at the time was working at Nile. I think he's moved on somewhere else now. And it was a small seminar. It was a seminar for teacher trainers and administrators in the school. Probably about 15, 20 people maximum. And I remember this very clearly, Volkan.
Uh-huh.
He walked into the room kind of looking like a teacher. So, jacket, trousers, shirt, tie, etc. Looking very much like a kind of old-fashioned teacher in the way that I remember teachers. And what he did, which I will remember till this day, he took his jacket off and he rolled up the sleeves of his shirt. And I thought, this guy means business.
I see.
Do you see what I mean? It's something about the persona, something about the attitude of the teacher. I'm not going to mess about. I'm going to teach you.
Exactly.
So my attitude has changed. My philosophy has changed a little bit from what we used to say. If you said to a teacher of, my age or whatever, a bit later, you said, what does a teacher do? And you would say, well, a teacher facilitates learning.
Exactly.
Well, that's a very bland term, isn't it? It facilitates learning, meaning I give the students things to do and I hope that they learn. But I can't guarantee that they do. And that kind of worries me a little bit,
I see.
Anyway, I think that's the way. So perhaps I'm going round in a circle to the old days.
I see. But
I don't know.
But they're really great things to listen. Yeah, really, really. Thank you very much.
Anyway,
they're all really the precious the moments that you had. Thank you, and it's really great about the philosophy. Thank you, sir. And my next question is really important for me because I'm really wondering what are you going to say about it according to your huge experience in Turkey, by the way. And here is it. How has ELT, which is English language teaching, changed in Turkey according to your observations from the time you started here and right now?
Volkan, that's another very big question because there have been many changes. I mean, not only which I have seen, but which you've seen too. I'm going to tell you another little story which demonstrates quite a lot of this, if you like. In 1983, when I came to Turkey to work at Özel College, of course, there were no private universities. And in Izmir, there were only 4 private schools, Özel College being one of them. Now, that kind of statistic tells you something about how things have changed. because now we have a proliferation of private universities, and in Izmir we have literally hundreds of private schools now.
Yeah, lots of.
So that's that's something that's changed, isn't it? I mean, the system is kind of gradually privatizing. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. And what it means is that more students have the opportunity, we hope, to learn English. But there is a question mark about quality, and there's a question mark about whether these schools and universities are properly regulated. But that's another question. I'll take you back to 1983 again. And I'm working at Öztürk College. I'm a much younger man. My hair was a different color then, and
You are still good.
But I'll tell you what, Volkan, that the teachers at that school were very professional. Methodology, no, old school. They taught in a very kind of, I don't like to say the word old-fashioned, but a very traditional way. But they produced results.
Perfect.
The students were very good, and probably most importantly, the parents were very good too, because the parents felt that their kids were privileged to go to one of a very small number of private schools. So when we met the parents as teachers, the parents would say things like, how can I help? What can I do at home to help with your teaching? Do you have any behavioural problems with my kids? Are there anything to do with that? No.
Yeah.
As opposed to turning responsibility entirely over to the teacher, saying, that's your job, you teach, okay, we're just the parents.
Yes.
That's a major change too. So it's about privatization, and it's about attitudes of parents and possibly authorities too. So there's that. Secondly, money. And I'm not talking about privatization and profiting. I'm talking about the amount of money which has been spent on English language teaching. So if you think of the amount of money that's been spent setting up all these schools and universities, the private universities generally say that they are English medium universities. So an enormous amount of money in that, an enormous amount of money and time in training teachers. So you have the influence of Cambridge, CELTA, Delta, etc. courses, the influence of the British Council, the influence of the American Embassy, the influence of the publishing companies, who spend a vast amount of money marketing their books through teacher training. So huge amounts of money. But again, it's a little bit like the last question you asked me. You have to ask the question, how effective has that been?
I see.
So huge amounts of money has been spent. What's the result? And I think, we need to ask the question, has it made a huge amount of difference to the way that the kids are taught and how much they learn? Again, going back to Turk College, actually, Volkan, it was one of the most enjoyable jobs I've ever had.
So
the kids were great, very bright kids, because there was an entrance exam for the school. Turk College in those days had a wonderful garden. I did a lot of my teaching in 2 wooden classrooms in the garden of the school.
Very nice.
Each of those classrooms had a soba. And in the winter, the cleaning woman would come in and they would put wood and coal on the soba. And the room would fill with smoke. And nobody could see what they were doing. So it was very funny, but it was a very interesting experience. The other difference, in conjunction with that, is what we were allowed to do in terms of English teaching. So in those days, and this is a big change and a very important one, in those days, the prep year, Hazlitt year, for students was at the age of 11.
Mm.
So it was their first year in secondary school. And that is the perfect time to teach students a language.
A language, exactly.
So we had great fun with those kids. So we took them on trips, we took them to the seaside, we took them on picnics, we had fun in the language lab. We were also, in those days, allowed to teach science and math in English. You won't believe me, but I taught science in prep.
Oh.
And we had great fun with a course book which had a page with a tiny picture of an elephant and the caption that said, "An elephant has many cells." And on the next page, there was a very big picture of an amoeba with the caption, "An amoeba only has one cell." So,
really,
but my conclusion, looking back at that time, Volkan, is that actually the kids learnt more English in their science lessons than they did in their English lessons.
I see.
Yeah, and I'm sure that some people who are watching and listening to this are thinking, well, yes, because you're attaching the language to a subject.
Exactly.
You're attaching the language to the real world. Mm-hmm. And that is very often what we don't do in language teaching. You know, language teaching is not, strictly speaking, a classroom language, a classroom subject. It's a means of communication. So when we use language, we talk about other things. So when we teach it, we should teach it in conjunction with other things. And I'll talk a bit more about that later when you ask me another question, I'm sure.
I see. Okay. I will talk
but
about
those are the main changes then. So it's about the Hazlitt system.
Uh-huh.
It's about privatization. It's about the influence of money. And then a big question at the end, how much difference has it made in terms of, for example, the number of people in Turkey who can function well in English?
I see.
Yeah.
About means. Well, a big change, really.
Huge changes, and lots of others too.
Thank you, Mr. Don. Thank you. And can I move to the next question?
Please do. Yeah.
All right. So my next question is about teacher training and that kind of things. Like, what do you think about, actually after the pandemic, we move from face-to-face to online education part more. So in this case, what do you think about the online teacher training courses and like online CELTA and Delta and etc. courses? What is your idea about it?
I think my idea is much the same as many people. I think online teaching and training is second best to face-to-face. What's happened, Volkan, is that because the pandemic came very suddenly, our reaction to that was immediately to say, let's carry on teaching in the same way that we always have, but let's do it online. And that's what we did. But there are two fundamental problems with that. One, there is no classroom.
Exactly.
And the classroom is one of the teacher's major resources. Number two, there is no school. So there's nothing going on outside the classroom, which is, of course, a major part of kids' education. So it's limited. And what I would like to see schools and administrators and everybody thinking about is to look at face-to-face teaching and online teaching as completely different things. So let's stop trying to do what we did before online and learn how to teach online very well. Because teaching online, I think, personally, is a specific skill. And I think there are some teachers who are very good at it. They have embraced the technology, they've learnt how to use it, and they've done wonderful things with it.
I see.
And there are others, possibly like me, who, yes, I can do it. I can I can train teachers online. It's okay, but I'm not very happy about it. Okay, now I'm going to give you my big online teaching secret.
Yeah, we are
Volkan. Okay. I hate breakout rooms.
It's really nice. Yeah, I think we all do.
There has to be a better way, really. Yeah. So yeah, I think we've wasted a lot of time. In two ways. We've wasted time in not developing online teaching as a specific way of teaching. Yeah. I think we've also wasted time in not reflecting on what we did before.
I see.
So, okay, yes, let's continue to do what we did before, but do it online. But the question is, was what we did before very good? Maybe not. So maybe we've missed an opportunity to look back and say, well, what was wrong with what we did prior to the end of the pandemic? Yeah.
I understand.
So yeah, I mean, that's, those are,
well,
they're very general points. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Don. All right.
Okay.
So my next question is really, I know that, and probably most of our audience know about that, you have been working as a teacher trainer for a long time, and you maybe go from one city to another city, from one school to another school. You go lots of places to teach, to give some information, to make us better, to give them your experiences to the other teachers. But in other case, what's the downside or the dark side of being a traveling trainer?
I like the expression "the dark side." It's as if something horrible is going to happen to me while I'm on the road. Okay. The concept of a traveling trainer basically refers to people like me who work for themselves. So in order to be a traveling trainer, you need to be a freelance trainer, unless you work for an organization like a publishing company or maybe the British Council, who actually send people to different places. The downside, Volkan, is about uncertainty. Okay, so if I'm absolutely honest, and I'm sure other people who do the same kind of work will be honest, at least at the beginning when you start freelance training and traveling, the uncertainty is, where is my next paycheck going to come from?
I see.
Yeah. So who's going to give me some work next? Where have I got to go next? And sometimes, in order to make a living, you go and do things that you don't particularly want to do in places that you don't particularly want to go to. So there's the uncertainty. It gets better, or it gets better for most people. It certainly got much better for me as I built up a network of regular clients, customers, and got much more used to working alone and coping. Because to work for yourself, and I don't think it's just about teaching, I think it's about all professions. If you work for yourself, you've got to manage your own life. And it's not just about the job, it's also about being organized, being professional, marketing yourself, lots of aspects to it. So basically what you're doing is running a one-man business. And you've got to do it well, because if you don't do it well, you won't survive.
Exactly.
Yeah, and lots of people begin to work freelance, and then after maybe 2, 3, or 4 years, they say, "Well, no, I think I'll go and get a job because it's just more. It's just easier. It's just easier to go to school or go to a training center or whatever and pick up my paycheck at the end of the month."
Mm-hmm.
So that's one kind of uncertainty. The other kind of uncertainty is uncertainty about where you're going and what will happen when you get there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, imagine that somebody is organizing a training event. There are actually quite a lot of people involved.
Exactly.
So there's the trainer, there's the organization who are sponsoring the event, there's the people at the venue, and they're the audience. So the success of an event like that depends on good communication between all of those people. And that doesn't always happen, Volkan.
Probably.
The number of times that I have arrived at a venue ready to do a session or to give a talk or whatever, and found that what I had prepared was completely unsuitable because I hadn't been told exactly what they wanted, and had to deal with it on the spot.
I see.
I'll give you an example. I think maybe this was for a publishing company. I can't remember now, and it was somewhere in Turkey, somewhere in the west of Turkey, and I won't mention the city. But I was asked to do a session on critical thinking, and I was told that the audience, there would be about 20 or 30 English teachers with a very good level of English, well-trained, enthusiastic, quite young, and very ready to listen to me. Fine, I said, okay, and I prepared what I thought was a very nice session, and I arrived in the city and I arrived at the venue to find the local guy who was organising the event. He came up to me and said, "Right, okay, it's good." He said, "Everything's fine." I said, "Everything's fine. We have about 60 teachers." I said, "Well, okay, the number isn't really important." He said, "Yeah, but they're not all English teachers."
that's
So I said,
really
"Well, what
cool.
do you mean?" He said,
yeah.
there are some math teachers and science teachers and geography teachers
Wonderful.
who wanted to come. And actually, Volkan, it's understandable because critical thinking applies to every subject, not just English language teaching. So I said, "Well, okay, they can make the most of it. That's fine." And then he said, about a third of the audience don't speak English.
Oh, that's much better, really. That's really good. It's really good.
So that was an example of how things can go wrong. The upside of that, Volkan, is that you learn as a freelance trainer or consultant. You learn to deal with it.
Exactly.
You learn patience. You learn tolerance. You learn understanding. And instead of getting angry with people, you just deal with it. So in that case, yeah, I accepted who the audience were. The language problem, I just stood up and I said, "If you don't speak English, find somebody who doesn't sit next to them."
It's really nice. Yeah. Yeah, right.
Maybe
the one who speaks English can translate what you were
saying. Exactly. So we got over it, and it was fine. And I can tell you dozens of stories like that where things have gone horribly wrong when I've arrived at a particular place.
It's wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Darn, about wonderful moment that you shared.
That's the dark side.
That's really nice side, by the way. Do we have a question from audiences? Let me show you the question. What is the best way to neutralize affective filters of a learner?
Well, that's a very academic question.
Yeah, I see. But if you, we don't know if you don't want to say something about it, or maybe later you can give an answer. I can just skip it.
Perhaps I could come back to that. Is that okay?
Okay. If we
Yeah.
have time, we can talk about it. All right.
Okay, thank you. It's
You're
Matt
welcome.
who asked that question. Okay,
Thank
Matt,
you.
I'll come back to that if I can. Okay.
Okay then. So my next question is about probably when you go to your sessions, to teacher training sessions or other sessions, you always talk about, maybe they ask you, oh, Mr. Don, can you talk about your really wonderful teaching experiences, or what's the good things always. But this time I would like to ask you the vice versa. Can you tell us one of your bad teaching experience in your career?
Oh yeah, well I can tell you lots. I mean, some of them are very like the example that I've just told you about the dark side, if you like.
That was kind of one of them. Can be. Yeah.
But there are other things which have gone horribly wrong. Not so much in teaching, but in training, because
Sure.
one of the problems about being a trainer, particularly an experienced trainer, is that people have expectations.
Mm-hmm.
So if they come to your sessions expecting to learn something, or expecting to learn something new, or expecting to have some kind of deep insight into, and also to be interested and entertained very often too. But I'll tell you this. I'll tell you this story. I'm going back to around 1995, 96, which is when I joined the British Council as the director of the Teachers Centre in Izmir. And part of that job was to go and do presentations, talks, conference talks, and so on, in schools, universities, conference venues, and so on. One of the first things that I had to do was to give a talk at a local university here in Izmir. And at that time, I wasn't very experienced in doing large audience conference talks. The other thing that you need to understand is that 1995 was pre-technology. So it was before PowerPoint. Yeah?
Yeah, probably, definitely.
So anyway, the organisers had asked me to do a talk on course books. And I prepared, as we did in those days, I prepared a talk which was based on 10 transparencies. Volkan, do you remember something called an overhead projector?
Oh, of course, yeah. We had in our school.
Exactly. It's a thing that looks like a giraffe that projects the...
yeah, kind of something like this is doing...
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
So anyway, a couple of days before the presentation, I called the university and I said, you do have an overhead projector, don't you? And they said, yes, no problem at all. No. Fantastic, great. So I arrived and I had my presentation with my 10 transparencies. And I got up onto the stage, and I hate this. I hate actually standing on a stage and talking to people. You know, it's as if they want you to dance or sing or something. Yeah. And I got onto the stage and I started to talk, the introduction to the talk. And I turned around. The overhead projector was located behind me, in front of a very big screen. And I put the first transparency on the projector and switched it on. Went back to the front of the stage and continued to talk. Now, there was a teacher, an academic actually, in the front row of the audience, who was actually a friend of mine and also a bit of a joker. So after I'd been talking for a couple of minutes or 3 minutes or something, he started to make very strange facial gestures. He was going. And I kind of looked at him and I thought, he's just trying to put me off. It's a joke. So I carried on talking, and then a bit later, he started waving his hands at me like this.
Yeah.
So I tried to ignore this, carried on talking. Eventually, I walked down to the bottom of the stage and across the floor, and I said, "What's the problem?" And he said, "Turn round." it's burning.
Oh,
And my transparency was turning into a crumbled mass of plastic on top of the overhead
alright,
projector. Because, yeah, the projector was working, but the fan, the cooling fan inside it wasn't.
Oh, I see.
So I did the remainder of that talk by holding up the transparencies in front of about 100 people who couldn't possibly see them and finishing the talk. But that was incredibly embarrassing. And the week after that, I asked the British Council if I could buy a portable projector for the office, you know. So, yeah, but again, you know, that's another. Well, what's interesting about it, Volkan, is that actually, okay, all of that, you know, the overhead projector has been replaced by PowerPoint and overhead projectors and high technology, but actually nothing's really changed because the technology that we use now goes wrong.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, as we found when we were setting up this meeting, you know. It's unpredictable. It doesn't always work properly. So, you know, there's always got to be a plan B.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. Technology will always let you down. So anyway, that was one example of something that went particularly wrong at a present. And there were lots of others too.
The wonderful experience. Thank you very much, Mr. Don, again to share that.
No, you're welcome.
Moment. Thank you. We have another questions here from our audiences. And what was it? There are too many trainers who haven't taught a class or a course for many years. What do you think about it?
Okay, well, that's a really good question, actually. And, you know, I would congratulate the person who asked that question for noticing that. I don't know who it was who asked that question.
Ray Ismail.
Oh, okay, that's Ray Wiggin. Hi, Ray. Okay. Bottom line, all trainers should teach.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a very simple logic, isn't there, Volkan?
Probably, definitely, yeah.
You know, one of the problems that we have as trainers, we try, well, I think most of us try, to keep up with current trends in language teaching. You know, and there are many. You know, they come and they go. But we don't always keep up with what's actually going on in the classroom. So unless you're fortunate enough to be able to watch teachers teach in their schools, you actually don't really know very much about teaching performance. So what's happening to teachers is the way that they teach. And actually now, Volkan, that's extremely important because teachers this year, over the last 2 years now, have been under intense pressure to learn how to teach online, how to integrate technology into their lessons, and how to survive. Now, to be honest with you, I don't do very much classroom teaching myself, but I do have the opportunity from time to time to go into schools and watch teachers doing their jobs in their own context, which I think is very important.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, over the last year or so, I've been stunned, to be honest, by how hard they have to work, how many hours they have to teach, the amount of learning that's going on for them in terms of technology, apps, tools, and things like that, and how they still manage to, you know, I give a lot of praise to teachers who have done their jobs to the best of their ability over the last couple of years. But the basic answer to Ray's question is all teachers should either teach or they should have the opportunity to watch teachers teach in their own context.
I see.
I wonder if Ray is thinking about CELTA and Delta courses, or CELTA courses in particular, where trainers watch teachers teach but it's not in their own context. It's in a false context. So volunteer students in a particular situation, you know,
Right.
which is not very realistic. So yeah, you know, I think that's true.
I see. Thank you.
And I think being a teacher trainer involves a lot of things apart from tutoring on courses. It involves visiting schools. It involves understanding what teachers need, and possibly as a result, how you can help them.
You're right. Yeah. I see. That's really an important point.
But that's a very good question. It's a criticism that I've made of trainers very generally in the past. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Don. Thank you. And my next question is about the language teachers. So and it's really a bit funny, but I really wonder what's going to say. Can you tell us 5 adjectives that describe an effective language teacher?
Actually, maybe the audience can help me with this. I don't know. Okay, well, one of them would be motivated. One of them would be enthusiastic.
Motivated, enthusiastic, great.
One of them would be organized and well prepared. That's just one, I guess. One of them would be. There's no adjective to describe this, or there might be. If you can think of an adjective for this, you've done a wonderful job. If anybody in the audience can think, it's somebody who can remain effective despite being incredibly tired.
That's also another point. Adjective, we can say that. I see. All right then.
So I think it's 5, well, it's 4.5 probably, but you know, there are lots of other things. Professional, for example. I'm not really sure what that means, but professional is a good one. Yeah, sure.
All right then. So it's 5 then. Great. Thank you. Thank you, sir. So let's move to. By the way, we are getting our, you know, the time flies, by the way, because I'll ask a couple more questions, and you know, I don't wanna, you know, it's like it takes more than an hour probably, you know, it goes like this. I hope it's not a problem for you, sir.
No, it's not a problem at all.
All right then. So let's move at another point then. So I really wonder what you're gonna say this question. It's really interesting. So what if you could have one superpower to use in the classroom, what would it be and how would it help?
I can think of lots, actually. I think invisibility would be a good one.
Invisibility. Oh.
Invisibility, so that I could monitor students and notice what they were doing without them noticing what I was doing.
No, that's also nice. It's kind of.
And I could also leave the room, go to the teacher's room, and have a cup of tea, and come back again without anybody noticing.
Yeah, that's also nice. Yeah, sometimes we really need that during the lesson. We need to go and get some coffee. I see. It's okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's one. I mean, I think you could apply most of the superpowers to teaching. You know, endurance. That was the word that I was looking for before. Endurance. The ability to keep going despite feeling tired and lacking energy. So yeah.
I see.
So that, I think, yeah.
Okay, thank you, sir. And my next question is this, sir. What was the biggest challenge that you faced this year?
Well, I think the challenge is the same challenge that most teachers have faced, and that is adjusting to changing circumstances. So, I mean, in the space of a year, we've had face-to-face classes, we've had online classes, we've had some face-to-face classes and some online classes, and teachers have had to adjust to this all the time.
Mm-hmm.
They've also had to, prepare materials for online classes and so on. And I, as a trainer, have tried very hard to meet teachers' demands in terms of what they need for successful online teaching.
I see.
So, I mean, that's been a challenge. The other challenge, Volkan, is you might laugh at this. To be honest, over the last year, I've had less work to do than usual. And you might think, oh, that's great. Doesn't have to work so hard.
Really, that's nice.
But actually, the reason is that teachers have not had the time or maybe the enthusiasm for teacher development because they've been so busy.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And my answer, and I'm sure that you will agree with this, is that actually there wasn't very much need for teacher development over the last year because teachers were developing by themselves.
Definitely, I think.
They were learning. I mean, 2 years ago, how many people knew how to use Zoom for a classroom lesson? So everybody's learnt the basic technology, and some people have learnt very advanced technology. So there has been teacher development going on all the time, autonomously, without people like myself and other trainers actually interfering in any way at all.
I see.
And I think, that will probably go on for some time.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree about it, sir. That's really another great point that you mentioned. And let me look. My next question is about the course books. I would like to ask another question about it. So what's the place of the course books in language teaching?
Well, that's another huge question. Okay, on the good side, I think most trainers would argue that a course book provides structure. Perhaps it provides safety for teachers, particularly less experienced teachers.
I see.
So maybe less experienced teachers need the course book to refer to and to help them plan their lessons and plan a series of lessons. Course books tend to be quite well designed. The tasks in them tend to be reasonably good. The problem, and I know that all trainers would say the same thing, course books are designed for a global market. The course book that you choose in your school is not designed for your students.
Yeah.
So inevitably, to make the book effective, you need to adapt, possibly substitute sections of the book to suit your particular teaching and learning context. So there's no such thing as a perfect course book. It can't be, The other problem, and this perhaps applies to more experienced teachers, is that because the course book provides structure, it can also provide lesson plans, so you just follow the book. Yeah, and it can also provide the syllabus for your students. So, book 1 is your syllabus for the first semester. Book 2 is your syllabus for the second semester. Again, that may not suit your particular group of students. So are you planning lessons which are appropriate for your students? Are you planning a syllabus which is appropriate for your students?
I see.
And on top of that, because course books are quite conservatively designed, because they're designed for a global market, they don't allow very much opportunity for creativity. They tend to be quite standardized. So these days they tend to be topic-based thematic course books, And in each topic, there will be some listening, some reading, some speaking, some writing, some grammar exercises, a bit of vocabulary. And generally speaking, it will always be in the same order for each unit. Okay, that's okay. The material is there. But what is the teacher adding to that?
I see. That's the question.
Does the teacher need to be a little bit creative? Yes, they do, because they need to adapt the material. Are they introducing things which are not in the book, which would be either more suitable or more enjoyable for the students? And Volkan, this ties in very clearly with how much teaching the teachers have to do.
I see. Because
if you're teaching 30 lesson hours a week, which many teachers are, some teachers are teaching more than that. If you're teaching 30 hours a week, you haven't got very much time to be creative. So you will rely on the book.
Yeah.
Maybe, so we've got two factors there really, which are limiting perhaps the opportunity for teachers to be more creative and perhaps to make teaching a bit more enjoyable.
I see. Right. You are right. But exactly, you mentioned it. We stick with probably most of the time we need to follow the book to keep track. I see. Thank you. Thank you, sir, about it. And my next question, sir, here is it. It's related with your experiences about language teaching experiences. What's the place of classroom observation in language teaching? And have you ever faced a very difficult teacher to change his or her mind after the classroom observations that you provide him or her?
Observations are very important. Providing that they are conducted in the right way. Any trainer who works in an institution or even freelance trainers like me will tell you that there are two types of observation. One type is developmental. So the observation is there to provide feedback and hopefully make the teacher better next time. But there is another type of observation which is about appraisal. And that is what teachers don't like. They don't like an administrator or the head of department or somebody coming into their classroom and judging their teaching on the basis of maybe 20 minutes or 30 minutes observation. So observations have to be carried out regularly. Teachers have to know that they are for developmental purposes rather than appraisal purposes. And teachers and trainers need to be trained in the process of giving feedback. The problem that you refer to is quite a common one, that a teacher will be defensive or resist your feedback on their lesson if they feel that you are being critical in any way at all. It's a funny business, Volkan. Here in Turkey, when I started observing teachers and giving feedback, I was amazed at the number of teachers, Turkish teachers, because I think this is a cultural thing, Turkish teachers who would come to me and say, I want you to tell me what was wrong. And I would say, well, actually, I'd prefer to tell you what was right and maybe make a few suggestions about things that you could improve on. The way that I've dealt with this and the way that I encourage other trainers to deal with this, because it happens to everybody, is to make sure that the feedback comes from the teacher. So instead of telling them what you saw in the lesson, you ask them to tell you what happened in their lesson.
That's another point, really.
And that way you break down the resistance and you avoid confrontation. Because confrontation is very difficult to deal with.
I see.
It's very emotional, and of course, if observations are handled wrongly, they can actually be quite damaging to teachers. It's very easy to damage a teacher's confidence. for some considerable time if you are too critical, or if you're critical in the wrong way. Volkan, you've disappeared from the screen.
Yep.
Oh, there you are. You've come back. You've disappeared for a moment. So yeah, I think observations in an institution, observations are vital, and I think that teachers should expect to be observed, but they should also know who is going to observe them and trust those people, and that kind of trust is built up between a trainer and a teacher over a period of time.
I see the point.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you very much about it. By the way, that was something happened. That's why
It's okay. It's okay.
Sorry about it. So my next question is about. I'm sure that in your career you have lots of, time to read something about ELT. Yeah. So what can you suggest to us to read about ELT?
Okay, you said something interesting there. You said that you were sure that I spent a lot of time reading about ELT. Actually, I don't.
Really?
I don't.
Okay.
I do read quite a bit. Of course, I do, because it's my job. I mean, particularly if I'm asked to do a presentation or conference talk or something on something that I don't know very much about. One of the things that you have to do as a trainer is, except under exceptional circumstances, you don't say no. So if somebody comes along and says, I want you to give a talk on, I don't know, soft content and language into, you don't say, oh no, I don't know anything about that, because you should, because you're a teacher trainer.
Definitely.
So what you do, Volkan, is that you go away and you read until you are confident that you know more than the audience is likely to know.
That's a good.
So that kind of reading is purposeful. It's directed. The kind of reading that I do, and the kind of reading that I would recommend teachers to do and students to do, is anything that really interests you.
I see.
The internet has opened up huge possibilities for reading. I'm not very keen on reading from a screen, but if we have to, that's fine. And I have a nice big screen on my computer, and it's quite easy to read from. And what happens when I read, I will go and begin to read something that somebody has told me that I should read. So you should read this article on whatever it is, okay? And I will look at that, and I will have a look at that. And the internet is wonderful for distractions. So when you're reading something, you get distracted by something else. You see something else on the screen. You think, oh, that looks interesting. And you lose focus, and you go and look at that. And actually, originally I thought, no, I have to stop doing that. I have to stop being distracted. But actually, it's not a bad thing, because the distractions tend to be more interesting than what I was supposed to read in the first place.
I see.
And when teachers come to me and say, we would like our students to read more outside the classroom, my question to them is, are you telling them what to read? And the answer usually is, yes, we guide their reading. And my suggestion is, why don't you let them choose? Let them choose what they want to read, and then come back and tell you what they read.
What they read.
Because isn't that what we do in real life? Yes, okay, we read a little bit to do with our jobs or our hobbies or whatever. But generally speaking, if you're reading a newspaper, for example, you read the article that goes with the headline that interests you.
I see. That's
And I think sometimes we're a bit too rigid with students. A lot of the reading texts in course books, for example,
uh-huh.
okay, they're there to develop reading skills, or they're there to introduce vocabulary or grammar, but very often they're not very interesting themselves. So is the content interesting?
Yeah, I agree about it. Yeah.
And in the real world, if the content isn't interesting, then we don't bother to read it. So, why do we force students to read things that they don't particularly want to read?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. But sometimes I also think that, when the things that you mentioned here, like, okay, we ask them to read these things. What about if we put ourselves on their shoes and think about that? They ask us, Mr. Inert or whatever teacher, read this at home. Every time they come as the things that we don't like it, they ask us to read. It's kind of the same thing, I think. Probably.
Yeah, it is. Well, it is, absolutely. And I mean, very often if somebody tells me what I should read, I might, I might have a quick look at it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have colleagues who write, contribute to magazines and journals and so on. And very often they will send me something and say, would you like to have a look at this and comment? And I'll kind of look at it and I'll think, well, I've got nothing to say. I've got nothing to say because I haven't really enjoyed reading it that much. I think when we read out there in the real world, we tend to read to satisfy our own demands, our own preferences.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Totally.
And I think maybe that's what ought to happen in the classroom too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so we have a question from someone here. Can I ask that one?
Sure. Yeah, of course.
What is your best practice or technique to encourage weakly motivated teenager to engage in language class? Just kind of.
That's an interesting question. It's a very interesting question. It's a question that many teachers ask. We have unmotivated students. Interestingly, unmotivated students also tend to be the weak students.
Exactly.
And it works like this, Volkan, that the weak students decide that they are weak and that they are always going to be weak. And therefore they give up.
I see.
And they prefer to behave badly in lessons or just not focus or whatever. This is where skilled teachers will identify those students very early on and use some differentiation techniques. So if you've got weak students in the class, if you've got 24 or 30 students in your class, you have no choice but to aim your lesson at the mid-level, in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do with the weak students and what do you do with the really strong students? And that's where differentiation comes in. So basically, you've got to find things which are challenging for the weak students at their level.
I see.
One of the things that I've always said because education in all societies is, well, it's mass education. So we educate a lot of people at the same time.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I point out to teachers is that there is no logical reason why all the students in your class have to be doing the same thing at the same time.
I see.
Except that it's convenient.
Uh-huh.
It's convenient for the teacher.
I see.
So if you take that factor away, then yes, okay, give the weak students something different to do, give the very strong students something different to do that will challenge them. Because students will generally respond to challenge and they will respond to positive feedback and encouragement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I see.
But it does mean that the teacher has got to realise who these people are very early on in their learning career. Otherwise, they get too far behind and they get lost and they give up.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So we need to be really careful about them to during the lessons about it, as you mentioned. And also the term that you mentioned, differentiation, is really, really important in our lessons. If we have especially if we have a mixed ability classes, I think that's really, really important point that we have to focus.
Well, to be honest, Volko, the term differentiation it's a very fashionable term now.
Exactly.
But in reality, many teachers have been practicing differentiation for many years, because every class that we teach is mixed ability in some way.
You are right.
And many teachers have found their own way of dealing with that. Yeah.
I see.
Differentiation just it's another very trendy term, for dealing with mixed ability classes.
Classes. I see.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Sure.
Mr. Darn. All right, and just the 2 questions left. And
Okay.
yeah,
As many as you like. I don't mind.
All right.
It's okay.
Yeah, I know that you are very busy. So here is another question. When you think about the 5 W's and how, like how, who, what, where, and when, and why, and how about the ELT, what questions come to your mind?
About 1 million different questions, I think, Rokon. I think what I'd like to do is to focus on kind of ELT and education generally.
All right.
With some of these. So I would ask the question, why are we doing what we're doing? What's the purpose? So what is the purpose of teaching English language in the way that we do? And it's a very good question, actually, because
so we
because
can
a lot of we can, but I'll keep it short. A lot of students will answer that question because I need to pass an exam.
I see.
Yeah, a lot of teachers, whether they're telling the truth or not, will say, because we want our students to function in English in the real world. Now, there's a how question there. So how are those two things compatible? Yeah.
I see.
And how should we teach to make them compatible? Another question that comes to me, what next? What next in English language teaching? You've noticed this, Volkan, in your career too. Things come and things go in language teaching, don't they? And everything goes round in circles. So I mean, in recent years, we've had neuro-linguistic linguistic programming, we've had emotional intelligence, we've had demand high teaching, we've had critical thinking, we've had all kinds of things.
I see.
And none of them have become approaches. They've become things that we have integrated some of into what we do. But I'm not sure. Next, another WH question here. When should we teach? When should we teach English? And the answer is as young as possible.
As young as possible.
I mean, I notice now that English is being taught in kindergartens.
Yeah, that's
which is
really, I think, the critical point.
Not a bad thing. Not a bad thing at all. Certainly, as I mentioned much earlier, when the Hazeluk year in schools was at private schools, but at the age of 11, that was incredibly successful. Incredibly successful. I've absolutely no idea why that was changed, and it needs to be brought back. I'll tell you one more story, very quickly, to do with that. Before the pandemic, in the times that we could actually go out freely, I was in my local barber shop having my hair cut, and there was a guy sitting next to me in the next chair who I can say I would describe him as a kind of typical middle-aged Turkish man. So he's kind of quite big and quite dark with a big black moustache. You know exactly
Yeah,
what I'm
I can
talking about.
imagine.
And we're sitting there, and and he's looking at me, he's staring at me, and I can look at him. And suddenly he said to me, "Are you Mr. Darn?" I said, "Well, it depends, maybe." Who's asking, And he said, "You taught me," he said, referring to me, "you taught me in prep at Turk College in
Wow.
1984. And we sat there and we had a long, quite fluent conversation in English. And he had not studied at university in English, and he had not used English very much in his business. But he
Wow.
had remembered. And he remembered, as we all know, Volkan, by association, because he remembered everything we did in those classes. Do you,
Wow.
Mr. Dart, do you remember the day where you took us to Cheshire and somebody nearly drowned? Do you remember the day that we had a picnic in the forest outside Kamal Pasha and somebody tried to chop down a tree and he stopped them? Yeah, things like this, associations to events and to enjoyable teaching. Because at that age, and this is the key, Volkan, at the age of 11 or younger, kids are not cynical.
Yeah, that's a good point.
They don't say things like, "Oh, why are we doing this? We don't need to do this. Can't we do something more interesting, something more relevant?" They just do it and they soak it up. It's a perfect example of language acquisition.
Yeah, that's
They're like
really important.
sponges. They're like sponges.
That's
So
really
yeah, I mean
wonderful point.
that guy in the barber shop was absolutely typical of somebody who had grown up remembering so much of the English that he had learnt at the age of 11 or 12 years old. That doesn't happen if the learning takes place much later.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree about it. Yeah. When they're much younger, as you mentioned that in the story that you mentioned here or in the real, that's really important point that we need to focus on the as young as they are. When they get older, I mean, it becomes really hard to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I see.
So I mean that's a selection of your questions. One last question will be what should we be teaching? I have firmly believed for many years that we don't need to try to teach our students the whole of the English language because they're never going to need it.
Yeah, probably they do. You're right.
I mean, how often do you use the future perfect, really?
I don't know.
So, I think we should be looking at what students need to learn, and that will vary according to their purposes. Now, very clearly, if they're in faculty at university, they need to learn language which is to do with their subject. At lower levels, they need to learn things which are associated with real life.
Real life, exactly. I see.
So that when they get out there in the real world, they can at least function in a variety of situations.
I see. Okay.
So, I think it's something that we should give thought to, really. How much language do we need to teach them and what language do we need to teach them?
I see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you about it for these great questions about 5W. Really, each of them are really meaningful and each of them are really important point that you mentioned here. Thank you, Mr. Don. And here is the last question. Ready for it?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Are you tired?
No, I'm just waking up now.
Oh, wonderful then. Okay, so Mr. Don, what is your motto?
Motto. I'm trying to think of a nice Latin phrase that I could use that nobody would understand. I'm not sure that I've got one. I was having lunch with a colleague who is a similar age to myself, the other day, about last week, and he asked me a very important question. He asked me, how long do you think you can carry on doing what you're doing? And I looked at him and I thought, because, we get old, it happens to everybody. And my response to him, and I suppose that this is a motto in a way, my response to him was to say, I will carry on until I can't do it anymore. Or until I can't do it effectively anymore, either physically or mentally.
Mm-hmm.
So, when I'm not sure of what I'm doing, when I can't think properly, when I can't give a good presentation, when I make mistakes in a report, I will know that it's time to stop.
I know it.
So in a way, that's it's a kind of philosophy which you could...
Yeah.
If I had to choose a motto for teachers generally, it would be something like, it doesn't matter how good you are, you can always be better.
That's also good. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
That's really nice. And yeah, someone said, I love this motto. And someone, eat, sleep, Netflix, repeat. Ah, Miguel just said about it. Eat, sleep, Netflix, sleep. I see. Okay. All right then. So that's all from my side, Mr. Don, about the questions. And also now it's like before we ending our live sessions, would you like to add anything else to this lovely sessions? I still can't believe that we had this session, but that's really
no, except the only thing that I would like to add to everybody in the audience, and actually all teachers everywhere, is a heartfelt thank you for managing to continue to do your jobs effectively and with some motivation and enthusiasm over the last couple of years. Because, the pandemic has affected teaching and learning in a way that nobody ever imagined.
Uh-huh.
And whether we like online teaching or not, whether we like technology or not, we have learned collectively to deal with the situation in the educational context. And hopefully learners who have been through this last couple of years will not have suffered too much. And if they haven't, it will be as a result of the efforts of the teachers to try and find solutions to the problems.
I see. Mm-hmm.
So well done to all the teachers, really.
Thank you. To all of us,
including you, Volkan, including you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Don. All right. So tonight we had Mr. Don with us here, and I would like to say one more time to thank you, Mr. Don, especially for your precious time, for your experiences, and for your suggestions. And we had a really great moment with you, and I still can't believe that I just mentioned it, that we had this conversation. I was always thinking about inviting you, but now we did it in our 79th session. That's really marvelous for us, and it was really fruitful. All right, so that's all from Teacher Talks tonight. Steve Dunn was with us, and I hope you had joyful sessions like me, and we will see each other next Monday again at the same time on the same day with another educator on Teacher Talks. And until that time, take care of yourselves, and wherever you are, good night, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And also, of course, Mr. Don, thank you very much one more time, and take care of yourself too. And
thank you,
we will see each
Volkan.
other next time. And until next time, bye everybody, and peace. Good night.
Bye-bye.
From Teacher Talks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.